Park Bo-yoon wasn't a man you approached without permission. He was Chicago's nightmare wrapped in Armani, the Iron Lotus whose name alone could make grown men weep. But his greatest fear wasn't the FBI or rival syndicates. It was the 2-year-old girl who clutched a velvet rabbit and never made a sound. Doctors called it selective mutism from trauma, but Bo-yoon called it his punishment. That silence remained unbroken for 730 days, until a cold November evening at the Onyx Room, when the most dangerous man in Chicago felt his world detonate. His daughter spoke, not to him. She pointed a trembling finger at a black waitress who didn't know her own name was about to become a death sentence, and screamed one word that would set the underworld on fire. Mama. The Onyx Room wasn't a restaurant. It was a cathedral for the corrupt, an elite fortress tucked into Chicago's Gold Coast, where senators dined beside smugglers and no one asked questions. The chandeliers dripped crystal. The marble floors gleamed like black ice. This was where empires rose and fell between courses of wagyu and whispered threats. Doris Landa adjusted her uniform in the narrow staff hallway, her hands trembling despite the heat. She was 27 but felt 50, her body carved hollow by double shifts and a grief she couldn't name. 3 weeks into this job, and she still flinched every time the kitchen doors swung open. The tips kept her father's oxygen machine running. The fear kept her awake. Landa, eyes up, hissed Gerald, the floor manager, a thin man whose cologne couldn't mask his panic. Table 7 just sat down. You don't look at him. You don't speak unless he asks. You don't breathe loud. Doris frowned, wiping condensation off a wine glass. Who is it? The governor? Gerald's face went gray. Worse. Park Bo-yoon. The kitchen went silent. The line cook stopped mid-chop. Even the dishwasher's hands stilled in the soapy water. Every soul in Chicago knew that name. Park Bo-yoon was the Iron Lotus, head of the most brutal syndicate to ever bleed the city dry. Shipping, construction, politicians. He owned it all. Widowed young, isolated completely, and known for leaving his enemies in pieces. I'll take it, Doris whispered, though every instinct screamed to run. She needed the money. Her father needed her. That was all that mattered. She pushed through the door into the dining room. The usual hum of power and privilege had dropped to a tense murmur. At table 7, the best seat in the house, secluded in shadows but with a clear view of every exit, sat a man who looked like vengeance carved from stone. Park Bo-yoon was 34, wearing a suit so perfectly tailored it might as well have been a weapon. His hair was black silk, slicked back to reveal a face of brutal elegance. Tattoos crept up his neck like vines of violence. His eyes scanned the room with predatory precision, cold and calculating. There was a scar cutting through his left eyebrow, a souvenir from a war he'd clearly won, but it wasn't the man that stole Doris's breath. It was the child. Sitting in a custom high chair beside him was a little girl, perhaps 2 years old. She had curls the color of warm honey, loose and wild, framing a face of heartbreaking solemnity. Her eyes were large and brown, too knowing for her age, holding a sadness that didn't belong in something so small. She clutched a worn velvet rabbit against her chest, her tiny fingers white-knuckled around its ears. The child wore a designer dress in deep crimson, but she looked like a ghost. This was Jia Park, the silent princess. Rumor said she'd never spoken a word. Not since the house fire that killed her mother. Not since the night that broke her. Doris approached the table, water pitcher trembling in her hand. Good evening, sir, she said, keeping her voice steady despite the way her heart hammered against her ribs. Still or sparkling? Bo-yoon didn't look up from the leather-bound menu. Sparkling. And warm milk for the child. Not hot. Warm. Of course. As Doris reached forward to pour water into his crystal glass, her wrist brushed the edge of the table. A scent lifted from her skin, faint and unintentional. Vanilla soap, cheap lavender lotion from the drugstore, the kind that cost $3 and smelled like hope. Bo-yoon went rigid, his entire body locked. He looked up, and his eyes, those cold, merciless eyes, collided with hers like a freight train. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across his face. Recognition. Pain. A buried memory clawing its way to the surface. Then it was gone, replaced by glacial indifference. Be quick, he commanded, his voice a blade wrapped in silk. Doris nodded and turned toward the child, forcing warmth into her exhausted smile. And for you, sweetheart, she whispered, crouching slightly to meet the girl's eyes. Let's get you something to drink. Jia slowly lifted her head. When the little girl's gaze met Doris's, the world stopped spinning. Doris felt it like a fist to the chest, a jolt of electricity that ripped through her sternum and seized her lungs. It was a sensation she hadn't felt in 2 years. Not since the day she woke up in a cold clinic room, sedated and shattered, while a grim-faced doctor told her that her baby hadn't survived. That phantom ache in her womb, the one she'd buried beneath bills and exhaustion, roared back to life with savage intensity. The child's lips parted. Her small body trembled. She dropped the velvet rabbit, and it tumbled to the floor in slow motion. Then Gia did something she had never done in 730 days of silence. She pointed. A tiny, trembling finger aimed directly at Doris Landa's heart. And she screamed, "Mama!" The word detonated through the onyx room like a grenade. Every conversation died. Every fork froze midair. Every head turned toward Table 7, where the most dangerous man in Chicago stared at his daughter in absolute, soul-crushing shock. Bo Yoon's chair crashed backward as he surged to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for the gun beneath his jacket. His eyes locked onto Doris with lethal focus. And in that moment, she understood what it meant to be prey. "Who are you?" His voice was a whisper of death. "Who sent you?" Doris couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't breathe, because Gia was reaching for her now, small arms outstretched, tears streaming down her face as she screamed the word again and again. "Mama! Mama! Mama!" And somewhere deep in Doris Landa's fractured heart, a truth she didn't yet understand began to claw its way toward the light. Welcome to Ruthless Romance Tales. And honey, you just stepped into something you can't unsee. If you've been riding with me, you know we don't do safe here, we do dangerous, we do addictive, we do the kind of love that brands your soul and refuses to let go. And if you're new, buckle the hell up, because what you're about to witness is a collision so violent, so inevitable, it'll rewrite everything you thought you knew about family, blood, and belonging. Hit that like button like your life depends on it, subscribe because you're already hooked, and smash that notification bell, because missing what comes next would be a crime. Now let's watch how one word from a child's mouth is about to tear Chicago's underworld apart. Doris didn't remember being dragged through the kitchen, didn't remember the back door or the alley or the moment Bo Yoon's hand clamped around her wrist like a steel trap. What she remembered was the cold, the November wind slicing through her uniform as he shoved her into the back of an SUV that smelled like leather and gunpowder, and something darker she couldn't name. Gia was screaming. High-pitched, desperate wails that scraped against Doris's skull like broken glass. The little girl thrashed in her car seat, face red and slick with tears, reaching toward Doris with hands that trembled with need. "Please," Doris heard herself say, though her voice sounded distant, underwater. "Let me hold her. She's terrified." Bo Yoon's jaw worked in the rearview mirror, his eyes black holes of fury. For a moment she thought he'd refuse out of pure spite. Then he jerked his head once, a brutal nod of permission. Doris's fingers fumbled with the buckle. The moment Gia was free, the child launched herself into Doris's arms, tiny fists clutching her uniform, face buried against her neck. The screaming stopped, just like that. The silence that followed was so absolute it felt like a living thing, pressing down on them, suffocating. Bo Yoon's knuckles went white on the steering wheel. Doris watched him through the mirror, watched the muscle jump in his jaw, watched something like anguish flicker across his face before he buried it beneath stone. He was looking at them, at the way Gia fit perfectly against Doris's chest, the way the child's curls mingled with Doris's braided hair, the way their skin tones blended like watercolors bleeding into each other. They looked like they belonged together, and that realization was making him murderous. The estate materialized out of the darkness like a fortress, high walls, iron gates, security that could wage a small war. Doris's stomach twisted as the SUV rolled to a stop, as Bo Yoon killed the engine and sat there in the silence, breathing hard through his nose like a bull preparing to charge. Inside, his voice was gravel and frost. Now, he didn't drag her this time, didn't touch her at all. Just walked ahead with Gia cradled against his shoulder, the child reaching back toward Doris with desperate hands, whimpering but not crying. Doris followed because what choice did she have? Every instinct screamed to run, but her legs carried her forward through marble hallways that echoed with their footsteps, through rooms that dripped with wealth and emptiness. Bo Yoon deposited Gia with a stone-faced woman who appeared from nowhere, then turned on Doris with predatory focus. His hand wrapped around her elbow, not bruising but inescapable, and he hauled her into an office that looked like a war room. Monitors, maps, a desk the size of a small country. He released her so abruptly she stumbled. Then he moved to the door, locked it with a finality that made her heart stutter, and turned to face her with the full weight of his attention. "Who sent you?" His voice was deceptively soft, the kind of soft that preceded violence. Was it the Italians? The Russians? Or are you working for someone I haven't had the pleasure of destroying yet? Doris opened her mouth, closed it. Her mind was spinning, trying to piece together what was happening, why this man thought she was anything more than a waitress trying to survive. I don't know what you're talking about. He moved so fast she didn't see it coming. Suddenly, he was in her space, towering over her, one hand braced against the wall beside her head, his body a cage. She could smell him now. Whiskey in winter and something sharp like ozone before a storm. His eyes searched her face like he was trying to read a language he'd forgotten. My daughter hasn't spoken in 2 years, he said, each word precise as a scalpel. 2 years of silence. And then you walk up to our table smelling like vanilla and cheap hope, and suddenly she's calling you mama. You expect me to believe that's coincidence? I expect you to believe it's the truth. Doris's voice shook but held. I'm nobody. I serve food. I go home. That's my life. Liar. He leaned closer. And God help her. She felt the heat of him, felt the rage and confusion rolling off him in waves. Nobody is nobody in my world. Everyone has a price. Everyone has an agenda. So tell me yours before I lose patience. One of the monitors on his desk flickered to life. Gia, in another room, sobbing into the arms of the caretaker who looked lost and helpless. The sound crackling through the speakers was heartbreaking, raw, the kind of crying that came from a place too deep for words. Something inside Doris snapped. She shoved against Bo Yun's chest, and he was so surprised he actually stepped back. She pushed past him, trembling with adrenaline and fury, and something that felt dangerously close to grief. When she spun to face him, she saw her own reflection in his eyes, a woman with nothing left to lose. You can kill me, Mr. Park. Her voice cracked but didn't break. You can make me disappear and no one would notice. But look at her. She pointed at the monitor where Gia wept. I am the only one who can stop her crying. I don't know why. I don't know how. But I am. So you have a choice. You can hurt me and break her heart, or you can put your ego aside and figure out what's actually happening here. Do you want to be the monster your daughter fears, or do you want to be her father? The silence stretched between them like a wire pulled taut. Bo Yun stared at her, and for the first time since that restaurant, she saw past the armor, saw the man beneath the monster, saw someone just as terrified and confused as she was. His jaw unclenched slowly. When he spoke, his voice had lost its edge, replaced by something rawer, more dangerous. What's your name? Doris Landa. He studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind his eyes. Respect, suspicion, and underneath it all, a spark of something neither of them was ready to name. We're going to find out exactly who you are, Doris Landa. He moved to his desk, pressed a button. And why my daughter knows you. The needle slid into Doris's arm at 3 a.m. She didn't fight it, didn't protest when the private doctor with tired eyes and expensive shoes swabbed the inside of her cheek, drew her blood, and disappeared into the fluorescent-lit laboratory wing of Bo Yun's estate, like a ghost. She sat in the guest room they'd locked her in, a gilded cage with silk sheets and bars made of questions she couldn't answer. Bo Yun stood by the window, backlit by the city lights of Chicago sprawling below them like a circuit board of broken dreams. He hadn't spoken in hours, just stood there, statue still, watching the night bleed into dawn. Doris could feel the weight of his thoughts pressing against the walls, suffocating. He thought his wife had cheated. Doris could see it in the rigid set of his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched whenever he looked at Gia's photograph on the mantel. He thought he'd been raising another man's child. Thought the curls, the skin tone, the features that didn't quite match his own were evidence of betrayal. He'd carried that shame like a brand for 2 years, burning him from the inside out, and he thought Doris was the key to proving it. What he didn't know was that Doris had her own ghosts. 2 years ago, she'd walked into a clinic in Evanston with empty pockets and desperate hope. The ad had promised $10,000 for a simple gestational surrogacy. Carry someone else's embryo. Give life. Get paid. No questions asked. She'd signed papers she barely read, let them put her under, and woken up 9 months later in a haze of sedatives and agony as they told her the baby hadn't survived. Stillborn. A girl. She'd never even gotten to hold her. They'd paid her anyway. Guilt money. Blood money. And Doris had taken it because what else could she do? Grieve a child that was never supposed to be hers? Except now, sitting in this mansion prison, watching Bo Yun unravel in slow motion, she felt that phantom ache in her womb roar back to life. That knowing, that pull she'd felt the moment Gia's eyes met hers. The door opened. The doctor returned, his face carefully neutral, holding a manila folder like it contained nuclear codes. Bo-yoon turned from the window so fast Doris flinched. Well? His voice was a blade. The doctor set the folder on the desk between them. Opened it slowly. Doris saw numbers and percentages and scientific language that might as well have been hieroglyphics. But she saw the bold text at the bottom, the conclusion that made her world tilt sideways. Miss Landa is a genetic match to the child. Maternal. The doctor paused, his eyes flicking to Bo-yoon with something that looked like pity. And you, Mr. Park, are the biological father. Paternal match. 99.9% certainty. The folder slipped from Bo-yoon's fingers. Pages scattered across the mahogany like snow. Doris couldn't breathe. Couldn't think. The room was spinning, tilting, collapsing inward. The doctor was still talking, explaining something about eggs and surrogacy and medical fraud, but his voice was underwater, distant, meaningless. Bo-yoon laughed. It wasn't a sound of joy. It was broken glass and relief, and something so raw it hurt to hear. He laughed until his shoulders shook, until he had to brace himself against the desk, until the sound morphed into something dangerously close to a sob. She's mine, he whispered, staring at Jia's photo. She's actually mine. Then his eyes cut to Doris, and the intensity in them made her stomach drop. He moved toward her slowly, deliberately, like he was approaching something sacred. When he crouched in front of her chair, bringing himself to her level, she could see the tears he refused to let fall. My wife was infertile, he said, voice hoarse. She couldn't carry, couldn't conceive, and she was too proud to admit it, too terrified I'd leave her. His hand reached out, hesitated, then gently touched Doris's knee. The contact sent electricity through her entire body. She must have used your egg, made it look like a simple surrogacy, lied to everyone, including you. Doris's breath hitched. They told me the baby died. They lied. His thumb traced a small circle on her knee, an unconscious gesture that felt unbearably intimate. They stole her from you, and they let me think. His jaw worked. They let me believe I'd been betrayed, that she'd given me another man's child to raise. The shame in his eyes was gutting. You weren't betrayed, Doris whispered. You were used. We both were. Bo-yoon stood abruptly, pulling her up with him. His hands framed her face, and she should have been terrified, but all she felt was the magnetic pull of his desperation. You weren't just the oven, Doris. You are the fire. His forehead dropped against hers, breath mingling with hers in the space between them. She is yours, and she is mine. The words hung in the air like a vow, like a threat, like a promise neither of them knew how to keep. Dr. Holloway lived in a brownstone in Lincoln Park that smelled like old money and older secrets. Doris insisted on coming. Bo-yoon had tried to leave her at the estate with Jia, tried to shield her from what he needed to do, but she'd looked at him with those dark eyes that saw too much and said, she was stolen from me. I need to see the man who sold my grief. So here they were, standing in Holloway's private study at 4 a.m, the doctor sitting in his leather chair like a king who'd just realized his throne was burning. He was in his 60s, silver-haired, with hands that trembled as he poured himself scotch he wouldn't get to finish. Doris noticed the medical degree on the wall, the photos of his family, the comfortable life built on lies and blood money. Bo-yoon didn't sit, didn't pace, just stood by the door like an executioner waiting for the appointed hour, his presence filling the room with barely controlled rage. Doris could feel the violence coiled inside him, could sense how badly he wanted to tear this man apart with his bare hands, but he was holding back. For her, because she'd asked to hear the truth first. You told me my baby died, Doris said, her voice steady despite the fury singing through her veins. You looked me in the eye while I was bleeding and broken, and you told me she was gone. Holloway's scotch glass rattled against the desk. I was paid, handsomely. I didn't ask questions. That was the arrangement. Who paid you? Bo-yoon's voice was silk over steel. The doctor's eyes darted between them, calculating his survival odds. They weren't good. Sang-hee, your underboss. He came to me 3 years ago with a proposition. Your wife needed a surrogate. Confidential. Off the books. He handled everything. The contracts, the payments, the delivery. Doris felt her stomach turn. And after? When you told me she died? Sang-hee said it was cleaner that way. No loose ends. No mother showing up later with demands or attachments. Holloway's hands shook harder. He said the Park family needed an heir that looked legitimate, pure. But when the baby came out, he swallowed hard, his gaze flickering to Doris's brown skin. When she didn't look Korean enough, he panicked. The room went very still. Even the city sounds outside seemed to fade into nothing. What did he do? Bo-yoon's voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut like a razor. He tried to fix it. Holloway was sweating now, his expensive shirt staining under the arms. He couldn't make the baby disappear without raising questions. Your wife was already too attached, but he could eliminate the problem later, once he had control. So he waited, planned. And 6 months after the birth, there was a fire. Doris's breath stopped in her chest. She watched Bo Yoon's face drain of color, watched the realization hit him like a bullet. The fire that killed my wife. His words were gravel. That wasn't an accident. Sung-hee wanted them both gone. Your wife knew too much about the surrogacy. The child was evidence of deception. He needed a clean slate so when you remarried someone he approved of, someone pure-blooded, the succession would be clear. He'd control it. Control you. Holloway was talking faster now, desperate. The fact that the child survived was a mistake. The nanny got her out, saying he's been trying to correct that mistake ever since. The glass in Holloway's hand shattered. He'd squeezed too hard, blood blooming across his palm, but he didn't seem to notice. He was staring at Bo Yoon like a man watching his own death approach. Doris felt something crack open inside her chest. Not just grief, not just rage, something colder, more calculating. She understood now why Jia had never spoken. The child had witnessed her mother die, had been trapped in a burning room, had been saved by chance, not love. And all of it, every single piece of trauma, had been orchestrated by a man who saw her as expendable because her blood wasn't pure enough. Where is he now? Doris heard herself ask, her voice strange and distant. The Lotus Tower. His office. He thinks he's untouchable. Holloway's eyes were pleading now. I told you everything. Please. I have a family. Bo Yoon moved then. One moment he was by the door. The next he was leaning over Holloway's desk, his face inches from the doctor's. You stole her child. You sold my wife's desperation. You enabled a man who burned my family alive. His voice dropped to something inhuman. Your family will mourn you, but they'll live. That's more mercy than you deserve. What happened next? Doris didn't see. Bo Yoon's hand moved to the small of his back, and she turned away, focusing on the family photos on the wall, the evidence of a life that had been built on other people's suffering. She heard a sound, brief, final, then silence. When Bo Yoon's hand touched her shoulder, she turned back. The room looked the same. Holloway looked asleep in his chair, head tilted back, eyes closed, almost peaceful, almost. We should go, Bo Yoon said quietly, his hand sliding down her arm to grip her wrist gently. Not a captor's hold, a partner's. Sang-hee doesn't know we know yet. That's our advantage. Doris nodded, letting him lead her toward the door. But before they left, she looked back one more time at the man who'd stolen her daughter and sold her grief for money he'd probably spent on that scotch, and those degrees, and that comfortable, evil life. Good, she whispered. In the car, the silence between them was different, heavier, more intimate. They weren't just bound by biology anymore. They were bound by shared rage, by the knowledge that someone had tried to erase their daughter from existence, and by the understanding that they would destroy him together. Bo Yoon's hand found hers in the darkness, fingers lacing through hers with startling gentleness. He wanted her dead because she looked like you, he said, his voice raw. Because she was beautiful and mixed and evidence of something he couldn't control. Doris squeezed his hand back, feeling the calluses, the strength, the tremor of barely leashed fury. Then we make sure he fails, spectacularly. His smile in the rearview mirror was terrifying and beautiful all at once. I knew there was fire in you. They returned to the estate as dawn bled gold across Chicago's skyline. Doris expected Bo Yoon to retreat to his war room, to plan Sang-hee's destruction with the cold precision of a general. Instead, he led her to the conservatory, a glass-walled sanctuary filled with orchids and silence. Jia was still sleeping. The house was holding its breath. Bo Yoon poured 2 fingers of whiskey into crystal glasses, handed her one without asking. Doris took it because her hands needed something to hold, something to keep her from shaking. The alcohol burned going down, grounding her in her body. In this moment, in the impossible situation they'd stumbled into. Sang-hee is powerful, Bo Yoon said, staring out at the gardens where frost clung to the roses like lace. He controls half my operations, has loyalty I've spent years cultivating. If he discovers you're Jia's biological mother, he won't hesitate. You become the final loose end. Doris's throat tightened. So what are you saying? I disappear? Change my name? Spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder? No. He turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her stomach flip. You become untouchable, legitimized. protected by law and reputation so thoroughly that killing you would require declaring war on me directly. He paused, letting the words settle. You marry me. The glass nearly slipped from her fingers. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. He moved closer, not crowding her, but close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath, the expensive cologne that clung to his skin, the faint trace of gunpowder that never quite left him. Think about it logically. You're already living here. Jia is already bonded to you. A marriage contract makes you family. Untraceable. Above suspicion. Sang-hee can't touch you without exposing himself. That's insane. But even as she said it, Doris's mind was racing through the implications. He was right. Marriage would legitimize everything. The connection to Jia, her presence in this world. It would transform her from liability to asset overnight. Is it? Bo Yoon's voice dropped lower, more intimate. Or is it the only move that makes sense? We're already bound by her. This just makes it official. Doris set her glass down carefully on the wrought iron table, needing the distance, needing to think without his proximity clouding her judgment. And what do you get out of this arrangement, Mr. Park? Besides a shield for your daughter? His smile was slow, dangerous, the kind that promised things she wasn't ready to name. I get you. The words hung between them like smoke. I'm not sleeping in your bed, Doris said quickly, drawing a line before he could cross it. This is for Jia. Protection, strategy, nothing more. Bo Yoon studied her for a long moment, something flickering in his dark eyes that looked almost like amusement. Agreed. Separate rooms, separate lives. A marriage on paper only. He extended his hand like they were sealing a business deal. Do we have an accord, Miss Landa? Doris looked at his hand. Strong, scarred, capable of terrible things and somehow, impossibly, capable of gentleness when he held his daughter. She thought about Jia's small fingers clutching her uniform, thought about the way the child had finally stopped crying when Doris held her, thought about Sang-hee out there right now, planning another fire, another accident, another way to erase the evidence of his crimes. She took his hand. His grip was firm, warm, sending electricity up her arm that she absolutely refused to acknowledge. We have an accord, Mr. Park. Bo Yoon, he corrected, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that felt far too intimate for a business transaction. If you're going to be my wife, even in name only, you should probably use my name. She pulled her hand back before she did something stupid. Fine. Bo Yoon. When do we do this? Tomorrow. I'll have my lawyers draw up the contract. We'll keep it quiet until after the Iron Lotus Gala next month. Public announcement. Sang-hee will be in attendance. He'll have no choice but to smile and congratulate us while his entire plan crumbles. Bo Yoon's expression turned predatory, and then we'll watch him very carefully to see what desperate move he makes next. Doris nodded, her mind already spinning through scenarios, through dangers, through the 1,000 ways this could go catastrophically wrong. But beneath the fear, beneath the logic, something else was stirring. Something that heated her skin when Bo Yoon looked at her like that. Something that whispered dangerous possibilities in the space between them. One more thing, Bo Yoon said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He produced a small velvet box that looked vintage, expensive, heavy with history. You'll need this. He opened it to reveal a ring that stole her breath. Not a diamond, an emerald the color of deep water, surrounded by smaller stones that caught the morning light and threw it back in prismatic defiance. It was stunning. It was terrifying. It was exactly the kind of thing a man like Bo Yoon would choose beautiful and deadly all at once. It was my grandmother's, he said quietly. She was Korean, married an Irish merchant against her family's wishes. They said it wouldn't last. They were married 47 years. He lifted the ring from its cushion. Give me your hand. Doris hesitated. Once that ring was on her finger, everything changed. She wouldn't just be Doris Landa anymore. She'd be Mrs. Park, the Iron Lotus's wife, a target and a queen all at once. She extended her left hand. Bo Yoon's fingers were steady as he slid the ring onto her fourth finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been made for her, like fate had been playing this game long before either of them knew the rules. His thumb lingered on her hand for a heartbeat too long, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Separate rooms, he murmured, but his voice carried a promise that had nothing to do with distance. For now, Doris pulled her hand back, cradling it against her chest, feeling the weight of the ring like a brand. For now implies something changes later. His smile was pure sin. Hope is a dangerous thing, Doris. But I've always been an optimist. 3 weeks passed like a fever dream. Doris watched the estate transform from mausoleum to home, one small miracle at a time. Gia spoke her second word on a Tuesday morning while Doris braided her hair. Pretty. Then her third word that same afternoon, unprompted, unpracticed. Stay. By the end of the first week, the child was stringing together simple sentences, her voice hesitant but growing stronger, like a bird learning it had wings. Bo-yoon watched them from doorways, from the top of stairs, from across rooms where he pretended to work, but was really just observing the way Doris moved through his house like she'd always belonged there. The way she sang while cooking breakfast, the way she'd curl up with Gia in the library and read stories in voices that made his daughter laugh. Real laughter, the kind that echoed. The house stopped feeling like a tomb. It started feeling dangerous. Tonight was the Iron Lotus Gala, their public debut as husband and wife. The marriage certificate had been signed in a lawyer's office with cold efficiency, witnessed by people who asked no questions and would remember nothing. But tonight, Chicago's underworld would see them together, would watch Bo-yoon claim her, would force Sung-hee to smile while his empire cracked beneath his feet. Doris stood in her guest room, staring at the dress Bo-yoon had sent. Crimson silk that looked like it cost more than her entire previous life. She'd already showered, her skin still warm and damp, her hair loose around her shoulders in natural curls she usually kept contained. The dress hung on the door like a challenge. She reached for the zipper. It caught halfway up her spine, the delicate mechanism refusing to cooperate. She twisted, trying to reach it, cursing under her breath as her shoulder protested. The scar there pulled tight, old pain flaring new. A knock at the door made her freeze. "It's me," Bo-yoon's voice, muffled through wood. "May I come in?" She should have said no. Should have told him to wait, that she could manage. But something reckless in her, something that had been building for 3 weeks of stolen glances and accidental touches, and nights lying awake knowing he was just down the hall, made her say, yes. He entered like he always did, with that predatory grace that made the room feel smaller. He'd already dressed for the gala, black suit that fit him like a weapon. Hair swept back, tattoos hidden except for the ones that crept up his neck like dark vines. He looked devastating. He looked dangerous. He looked at her like she was the only thing in the room that mattered. "I heard you struggling," he said, his voice rougher than usual. His eyes traveled down her bare back, lingering on the exposed zipper, the vulnerable curve of her spine. "Let me," Doris's breath stuttered. "I can do it." "I know you can." He moved closer, each step measured. "But you don't have to." She turned, presenting her back to him, feeling exposed in ways that had nothing to do with the dress. His fingers brushed her skin as he grasped the zipper, and she felt the contact like lightning. Slowly, agonizingly, he drew it upward. The rasp of metal teeth was obscenely loud in the quiet room. His fingers stilled at her shoulder blade. "What's this?" She knew what he'd found. The scar, 3 inches long, raised and pale against her brown skin. A souvenir from the clinic. From the emergency surgery when everything had gone wrong, when they'd carved her open to take Gia and left her with this permanent reminder. "A scar," she said, trying to keep her voice light, failing. "I can see that." His thumb traced it with devastating gentleness. The touch was more intimate than anything they'd shared, more vulnerable than the ring on her finger or the certificate with their names bound together. "Who hurt you?" Her eyes burned. Life. The word hung between them, heavy with all the things she couldn't say, all the ways the world had taken from her, the baby she'd thought was dead, the years of grief, the poverty and exhaustion and the quiet violence of survival. Bo-yoon finished with the zipper but didn't step away. Instead, his hands settled on her shoulders, turning her gently to face him. His eyes searched hers, seeing too much, understanding too much. Then, without breaking eye contact, he shrugged off his jacket, began rolling up his left sleeve. "What are you doing?" Doris whispered. He exposed his forearm. The burn scar was massive, covering the inside of his arm from wrist to elbow. The skin was mottled, puckered, the kind of injury that spoke of agony and survival in equal measure. "The fire that killed my wife," he said quietly. "I went back in for Gia." The ceiling collapsed. This was the price. His fingers found hers, guiding her hand to the ruined skin. Life tried to take everything from me that night. My wife, my daughter, my sanity. It failed. Doris's fingers trembled against his scar, feeling the texture, the story written in damaged tissue. She looked up and found him watching her, with an intensity that stole her breath. "We're both survivors," he murmured, his free hand coming up to cup her face with heartbreaking tenderness. "Both scarred, both still standing, His thumb traced her cheekbone, and she leaned into the touch without meaning to. So let us hurt life back, together. The words were a promise, a threat, a prayer. Doris didn't know who moved first. Didn't know if she rose on her toes or if he lowered his head, but suddenly his forehead was pressed against hers, his breath mingling with hers, the space between them crackling with 3 weeks of denial and want and fear and need. "This isn't part of the agreement," she whispered, but she didn't pull away. "No," he agreed, his hand sliding from her face to the back of her neck, fingers threading through her curls. "This is something else entirely. Bo Yun." "Say it again." His voice was raw. "Say my name like that, Bo Yun." And this time it wasn't a warning. It was surrender. He kissed her like a man starving. Like a man who'd been holding back for so long he'd forgotten what restraint felt like. His mouth moved against hers with desperate precision, tasting, claiming, demanding everything she'd been afraid to give. Doris's hands found his chest, felt his heart hammering beneath her palms, and she kissed him back with equal ferocity. 3 weeks of tension combusting in a single moment. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Bo Yun's eyes were black with want. "We have a gala to attend." "Yes," Doris managed, though her entire body was screaming to stay, to finish what they'd started. "And after," he said, tucking a curl behind her ear with shaking fingers, "we'll talk about revising our agreement." She smiled, sharp and dangerous. "Maybe I like our agreement just fine." His answering grin promised war. "Then I'll just have to change your mind." The Lotus Tower ballroom was a cathedral of excess. Crystal chandeliers dripped light like tears. The champagne was French, the caviar Russian, and the guest list read like a directory of Chicago's most beautiful monsters. Senators rubbed shoulders with smugglers. Judges laughed with loan sharks. Everyone wore designer masks of civility while plotting their neighbor's destruction. Doris descended the grand staircase on Bo Yun's arm, her crimson dress flowing like blood against the white marble. She'd pinned her curls up, exposing the elegant line of her neck, the diamond earrings Bo Yun had fastened there himself before they left. She looked like a queen. She felt like prey. Every eye in the room turned. Conversations stuttered and died. The Iron Lotus never brought dates to these events, never showed vulnerability, never shared. But here he was, his hand possessive on the small of her back, introducing her as his wife with a pride that was almost territorial. Doris felt the weight of 100 stares, calculating her worth, measuring her threat level, wondering how a nobody waitress had ended up wearing Park Bo Yun's grandmother's emerald ring. Sang-hee stood near the bar, immaculate in navy silk, his smile sharp as a knife. He was handsome in the way poisonous things often were. Perfect features, cold eyes. When Bo Yun led Doris toward him, that smile widened. "Congratulations on your marriage," Sang-hee said smoothly, extending his hand to Doris. "How unexpected. How sudden." Doris shook his hand, feeling the barely concealed violence in his grip. "When you know, you know. Indeed." His eyes traveled over her face with unnerving focus. "You look familiar. Have we met before?" "I don't think so," Doris said, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. Could he know? Had he been watching her all along? Bo Yun's hand tightened on her waist. "Darling, I see the Nakamura delegation. We should pay our respects." He guided her away, but Doris could feel Sang-hee's eyes following them like a predator tracking movement. The evening stretched on, a performance of normalcy that left her exhausted. She smiled, made small talk, played the part of the devoted wife while Bo Yun navigated political waters with ruthless charm. Then came the announcement for the charity auction. Bo Yun squeezed her hand. "I need to handle something. Stay visible. Stay with people. Don't go anywhere alone." "I'll be fine," she assured him, though unease crawled up her spine like ice. He kissed her forehead, lingering longer than necessary. 10 minutes. She watched him disappear into a private corridor with several syndicate heads, discussing whatever blood-soaked business required his attention. Doris accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and moved toward the terrace for air. That's when Sang-hee materialized beside her. "Enjoying the view, Mrs. Park?" His voice was silk over razors. Doris's grip tightened on her glass. "It's beautiful." "You know what's interesting?" Sang-hee leaned against the railing, too close, invading her space with calculated precision. "I was reviewing some old files today, fertility clinic, surrogacy contracts, and I found a photograph attached to one particular file." He turned to look at her, and his smile was venomous. "You look exactly like the photo. Same eyes, same bone structure. Almost like fate wanted me to find you." Doris's blood turned to ice. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you?" He moved closer, backing her against the stone balustrade. You were supposed to be a ghost, a nobody, someone who'd take the money and disappear into whatever mediocre life you came from. But here you are, wearing his ring, playing mother to a child that should have burned. His voice dropped to a whisper that froze her soul. You look just like the file photo from the clinic. Pity you'll burn just as easily as the first wife. Doris opened her mouth to scream, but the world exploded. The lights cut out. Emergency generators kicked in, bathing everything in red. Someone shouted about a fire in the east wing. Panic rippled through the crowd like a living thing. In the chaos, Sang-hee grabbed her arm with bruising force, dragging her backward into the shadows. She fought, clawed at his hands. But then something hard connected with her temple and the world tilted sideways. She heard someone crying. Jia. The child was here. They'd brought Jia as leverage, as insurance, and now she was screaming somewhere in the darkness. Doris tried to call out, but her vision was tunneling, consciousness slipping through her fingers like sand. The last thing she saw before everything went black was Sang-hee's cold smile and Jia's terrified face as someone carried her away. Bo-yoon knew something was wrong the moment the lights died. His instincts, honed by decades of surviving Chicago's underworld, screamed danger. He abandoned the meeting mid-sentence and ran for the ballroom, his hand already reaching for the gun beneath his jacket. The crowd was evacuating in controlled chaos, security herding guests toward exits, staff managing the manufactured crisis with practiced efficiency. But Doris wasn't among them. His eyes scanned the room with increasing desperation. No crimson dress, no familiar silhouette. Nothing. Then he saw it. On the marble floor near the terrace entrance. A single diamond earring, the backing torn away like it had been ripped from flesh. Blood smeared on the stone. And beside it, small and devastating, Jia's velvet rabbit. The rage that consumed him was biblical. He picked up the earring with shaking hands, feeling the sticky warmth of Doris's blood, and something inside him that had been carefully controlled for 3 weeks shattered completely. Find them, he roared at his security detail, his voice raw with fury and fear. Find them now or I burn this city to the ground. But he already knew who had taken them. Already knew where this ended. Sang-hee had finally made his move. And Bo-yoon was going to make him regret being born. He pulled out his phone, dialing the one number he'd hoped he'd never need. Trace her, he said when the line connected. Trace my wife, and send everyone. Because if Sang-hee hurt them, if he so much as touched a hair on either of their heads, there wouldn't be enough of him left to bury. Doris woke to rain and terror. Her head throbbed where Sang-hee had struck her. Blood matting her hair, consciousness swimming in and out like waves. She was on a rooftop, the Lotus Tower headquarters, 40 stories above Chicago's glittering sprawl. The storm overhead was apocalyptic, lightning fracturing the sky, thunder shaking the building's bones. Jia was screaming. That sound cut through the fog in Doris's brain like a scalpel. She forced her eyes open, forced herself to move despite the vertigo. Sang-hee stood at the edge of the roof, one hand gripping Jia by her small arm, dangling her over the void. The child was hysterical, reaching for anything, anyone, finding only empty air and rain. No, Doris choked out, trying to stand. Her legs wouldn't cooperate. The world spun. The rooftop access door exploded open. Bo-yoon emerged like vengeance incarnate, gun drawn, his face a mask of pure murder. Rain plastered his hair to his skull, his suit soaked black, his eyes wild with the kind of fear that transformed men into monsters. Let her go, Bo-yoon commanded, his voice carrying over the storm. Sang-hee laughed, the sound unhinged. That's exactly what I'm doing, letting go of the mistake you made, the pollution you allowed into our bloodline. He shook Jia like a rag doll, and the child's screams intensified. You married a black woman, claimed her mongrel child as your heir. You've destroyed everything pure about the Iron Lotus. She's my daughter, Bo-yoon roared, taking a step forward. Mine and Doris's, my blood, my family. Exactly. Sang-hee's smile was demonic, and that's why she has to die. I'll cleanse this mistake. Start fresh. You'll remarry someone appropriate, have real heirs, and the syndicate will be pure again. Bo-yoon's gun arm shook. He couldn't shoot, not with Jia in Sang-hee's grip. One wrong move and the child would fall. What do you want? Your life or hers, choose. Doris watched Bo-yoon's face crumble. Watched the calculation, the impossible mathematics of love and loss. She knew what he'd choose, saw it in the way he slowly lowered his gun, in the way his shoulders dropped in defeat. Fine, Bo-yoon said, his voice breaking. Take it, just don't hurt her, please. Sang-hee's grin widened. How noble. Then he opened his hand. Jia dropped. Everything happened in fragments. Bo Yun's scream, raw and animal. Sang Hee's laughter. The way time seemed to slow as the little girl in the red dress plummeted toward the ledge, toward the 40-story fall that would end her before she ever really lived. But Doris was already moving. She didn't think, didn't calculate, just acted on pure maternal instinct that transcended biology and contracts and every logical reason she shouldn't care this much. She launched herself across the rain-slicked roof, her vision tunneling to a single point, Ji-ah's small body arcing through space. Doris hit the ledge at a full sprint and dove. Her hand closed around Ji-ah's wrist, just as the child cleared the edge. The momentum carried them both over, and for one infinite moment, they were falling together into the storm and the darkness and the end. Then Doris's other hand caught the ledge. Her fingers screamed in protest, her shoulder socket nearly dislocating from the sudden stop. But she held on to the concrete with one hand and Ji-ah with the other, suspended over 40 stories of nothing, rain making everything slippery, gravity trying to rip them both away. "Mama!" Ji-ah sobbed, clinging to Doris's arm with tiny, desperate hands. "I've got you," Doris gasped, though her grip was failing, her fingers cramping, the ledge cutting into her palm like a blade. "I've got you, baby." Above them, Bo Yun moved. She heard him roar, heard the sound of impact, of violence unleashed, but she couldn't look, could only focus on holding Ji-ah, on keeping her alive for one more second, one more breath, one more heartbeat. Then Bo Yun's face appeared over the edge, his eyes wild and desperate. "Give me your hand." "I can't let go," Doris said through gritted teeth. "If I reach for you, she falls. Trust me." His voice cracked. "Please, Doris, trust me." She looked into his eyes and saw everything they could have been, everything they still might be if they survived this moment. So she made the choice. She let go of the ledge. For one terrifying second, they dropped. Then Bo Yun's hands locked around her wrist like iron, his other arm hooking Ji-ah around the waist. He pulled, muscles straining, face contorted with effort, dragging them both up and over the ledge, until they collapsed in a tangle of limbs on the rooftop. Doris held Ji-ah against her chest, feeling the child's heart hammer against her own, both of them sobbing and shaking. Bo Yun wrapped around them both, his body a shield, his arms refusing to let go. "You caught her," he whispered into Doris's hair, his voice destroyed. "You saved her. Our daughter," Doris corrected, looking up at him through the rain. "I saved our daughter." Something in Bo Yun's face shattered and reformed. He kissed her then, desperate and grateful and terrified, tasting rain and blood and the aftermath of almost loss. Ji-ah was sandwiched between them, safe and whole. The three of them, a knot of survival in the storm. Somewhere behind them, Sang Hee lay motionless, his neck at an unnatural angle. The confrontation was over. The threat eliminated. But none of that mattered as much as this moment. The three of them breathing together, alive together, family in every way that counted. "Let's go home," Bo Yun said, helping them both to their feet. And for the first time since this nightmare began, Doris knew exactly where home was. Not a place, not a house, but here, in the space between his heartbeat and hers, with their daughter's hand clasped tight between them. The estate was silent when they returned. Ji-ah had fallen asleep in the car, her small body tucked against Doris's chest, her breathing finally even. The staff knew better than to ask questions. They simply appeared and disappeared like ghosts, bringing first aid supplies, warm towels, and discretion. Bo Yun carried Ji-ah to her room while Doris stood in the master bathroom, staring at herself in the mirror. She barely recognized the woman looking back. Her dress was torn and filthy. Blood matted her hair. Bruises bloomed across her temple and shoulder in violent shades of purple and blue. But her eyes were different, clearer, fiercer. She looked like someone who'd walked through fire and decided to keep the scars as proof. She heard the door open behind her. Bo Yun's reflection appeared in the mirror, his own clothes ruined, his face etched with exhaustion and something raw. He held the first aid kit like an offering. "Let me," he said quietly. Doris turned to face him. "You don't have to." "I know." He moved closer, setting the kit on the marble counter. "But I want to, please." She nodded, too tired to argue, too wrung out to maintain the walls she'd carefully constructed. Bo Yun guided her to sit on the edge of the bathtub, then knelt before her, bringing himself to her level. His hands were gentle as he cleaned the blood from her hairline, his touch reverent, like she was something precious that might break. "I'm not fragile," Doris murmured, watching him work. "I know." His eyes met hers, dark and intense. "You jumped off a building to save our daughter." You're the strongest person I've ever met." He pressed a butterfly bandage to her temple with devastating care, but even the strong deserve to be tended to. His fingers moved to her shoulder, checking the bruising, making sure nothing was dislocated. The intimacy of it was almost unbearable. This wasn't the charged tension of their first kiss. This was something deeper, quieter, more dangerous because it was real. "Bo Yun," she started, not sure what she wanted to say. "I lied to you," he interrupted, his hands stilling on her skin. "That first morning, when I asked you to marry me, I told you it was strategy, protection, a business arrangement." He looked up at her, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her chest ache. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Doris's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I fell for you the moment you stood up to me in my office. When you looked at me like I was just a man, not a monster. When you fought for Jia before you even knew she was yours. The way you loved the broken parts of my life and didn't try to fix them, just accepted them. That's not falling," Doris whispered. "That's drowning." His smile was sad and beautiful. "Then I'm drowning gladly." He pressed his forehead to hers, breath mingling with hers. "I don't want separate rooms anymore, Doris. I don't want a marriage on paper. I want you. All of you. Every scar, every fear, every piece of fire that makes you who you are." Doris felt tears slide down her cheeks, and she didn't try to stop them. "I'm terrified." "So am I." He kissed her softly, a question and a promise. "But I'd rather be terrified with you than safe without you." She kissed him back, and it was different from before. Slower, deeper, a beginning instead of an ending. When they finally pulled apart, Bo Yun stood and offered his hand. "Come to bed," he said. "Not to seduce you, just to hold you, to know you're real and safe and here." Doris took his hand and let him lead her to the bedroom, let him help her out of the ruined dress, let him wrap her in one of his shirts that smelled like him. They lay together in the darkness, her back against his chest, his arms secure around her, and for the first time in years, she felt like she could breathe. Morning came gentle. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, warm and golden. Doris woke to find Bo Yun already awake, watching her with an expression that made her heart stumble. "Good morning," she murmured. "Good morning, wife." They found Ji in the breakfast room, already seated at the table in her favorite yellow dress, swinging her legs and humming. The room was quiet, peaceful, safe. Everything the restaurant had been loud and terrifying. Doris slid into the chair beside her daughter. Bo Yun took the seat across from them. The staff brought breakfast, and for a moment, they were just a family, normal, whole. Jia picked up her spoon and banged it against the table with gleeful enthusiasm, laughing at the sound. Then she looked at Bo Yun, her eyes bright with mischief. "Papa," she said clearly. Bo Yun's breath caught. It was the first time she'd called him that without prompting, without fear, just love. Then Jia turned to Doris and smiled. "Mama." Doris felt her throat close with emotion. "Yes, baby?" Jia clapped her hands together, her face radiant with joy. "Family," the word hung in the air like a benediction. Bo Yun reached across the table and laced his fingers through Doris's, squeezing gently. She squeezed back, and in that moment, she understood. They'd been forged in fire and blood and loss. They'd been broken separately and healed together. They'd chosen each other not because it was easy, but because it was right. Bo Yun looked at his wife and daughter, at the sunlight streaming through the windows, at the warmth that had finally returned to his home. He'd spent years building the Iron Lotus into something cold and terrifying, believing that's what strength required. He'd been wrong. The Iron Lotus didn't need to be cold to be strong. It just needed the right sun, and he was looking at her. And that, my beautiful souls, is how a single word from a child's mouth rewrote destiny. That's how a waitress became a queen, how a monster learned to love, and how a family was forged in fire and blood and impossible choices. If this story grabbed you by the throat and refused to let go, if you felt every heartbeat, every fear, every moment of devastating hope, then you know what to do. Smash that like button because this kind of love deserves to be celebrated. Hit subscribe because we're just getting started with stories that will ruin you in the best possible way. And drop a comment telling me which moment destroyed you most. Was it the rooftop? The confession? That final word? Family? I need to know. Because your girl here is absolutely wrecked, and I want you wrecked right alongside me. Until next time, remember, the most dangerous love stories are the ones that make you believe in second chances. Now go forth and be absolutely feral about this. I'll see you in the next tale.